Last we saw the Israelites, they were celebrating God because God had delivered them from the Egyptians. But in our story for this week, they are complaining to God. You see, once they got across the sea, they found themselves in a very large desert. And so they traveled for 3 days and they found no food and no water. And finally, after 3 days, they found a little bit of water and they ran up and they tried to drink it, but it was unsafe to drink. It would have made them sick. And so they cried out to Moses and they said, "Moses, what are we going to drink?" And so Moses cried out to God. And God showed him a tree. And Moses took a part of that tree and put it into the water, just as God told him. And the water was safe to drink. And again, God had provided for the Israelites. But they still didn't have any food. And so they kept traveling, and the people began to complain again to Moses, "What are we going to eat?" And so Moses cried out to God. And God told him that every morning there would be a dew on the ground, and that dew would turn into a bread-like substance, and they called it manna. And they could gather that manna up, and they could eat it throughout the day. And each night, a flock of quail would fly in and cover their camp. And they could collect those quail and eat meat each evening. But they were only supposed to take enough food for that day, for each person in their family, because God needed them to trust God, not to try to take more than what they needed. God only sent enough food for them, for all the people, for one day. And so if one person took more, someone else wouldn't have enough. And so they only could collect enough for one day, except on the 6th day. On the 6th day, they could collect twice as much, because on the 7th day, there was no food. This goes back to creation. Whenever God rested on the 7th day of creation, the Israelite people call this Sabbath, a day of rest. And so on the 6th day, they would collect twice as much food so that they had enough for both days. And if somebody tried to take more than just enough for them, the day after, that food would be rotten and it would be full of worms. And God provided for the Israelites like this for 40 years in the desert, with water, with manna in the morning, with quail at night, and collecting twice as much on the 6th day so they could rest on the Sabbath. Let's take a look at printout page 1 for this week. On it, you'll see 5 questions about the story that you just heard. Why don't we take a moment, we'll pause the video, and with your parents' help, answer the 5 questions by circling the right answer for each of them. Sometimes it's easy to feel like the Israelite people because they struggled to trust God. Even though God had done so much to provide for them, they still struggled to trust God. And that can be the same in our own lives. Everything we have, everything we see is there because of God. God has blessed us with so much. God has provided so much for us. But it can still be hard to trust that God loves us and that God will care for us. Whenever something bad happens in our life, it becomes especially hard to trust God. But those are the moments that we have to trust the most. Just like the Israelites in the desert for 40 years, they would not have found enough food or water if God had not been there for them. But they had to trust that it would come each day and only take enough food for that day. But God provided Because God loved them. And God was protecting them on their journey to the promised land. Take a look at printout page 2 for this week. On it you'll see 3 circles. We're going to make a craft out of these circles. And this week I got the help of some of our JYF youth in making the craft. And so we'll watch them as they color in each of those circles. And then cut around to cut them out. And then take a hole punch and punch on the X's. And then take yarn so they can tie each one to the other. God provides at the top, and the quail and the manna connected to what God provides, because God provided those things. And then ask your parents where you can hang this up. In your room, in your bathroom, on your kitchen refrigerator. But hang it up somewhere to remind you that God provides and that you can trust God. Thanks be to God. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.